You see, one of the most profound truths a person can grasp, especially in moments of heartbreak, is this: your self-respect must always come first. Not sometimes, not only when things are going well, but always. When you're standing at the edge of a failed relationship, aching and confused, you'll be tempted to do whatever it takes to pull it back together. You might feel compelled to reach out, to plead, to make promises, to beg, because you believe deep down that love should be enough to fix it. Especially if you still feel that she cares. Especially if there's a flicker of something still there. But here's the reality. Even if she does care, your self-respect is not something to be traded for affection. It's not a bargaining chip. When you beg, when you throw your dignity aside in desperation, you're telling the world that your worth is negotiable, that your identity hinges on the response of another person, that the only way you see yourself is through her eyes. And that's a dangerous place to be. Because if your sense of value rises and falls based on whether she stays or goes, you're handing over the reins of your identity to someone who no longer wants to hold them. It's not that love or care are meaningless. They're not. But they're not everything. She might still care. She might think about you at night. She might even miss the way things were. But caring is not the same as choosing. Caring doesn't guarantee effort, commitment, or compatibility. And if someone cares but still decides to leave, that's all the answer you need. No amount of begging will make that care become what it once was. In fact, the more you plead, the more you chip away at the very essence of what made you attractive in the first place, your strength, your independence, your sense of direction. A man, or any person, rooted in self-respect, doesn't chase after what's retreating, not because they don't feel the loss, but because they understand that chasing something that's moving away only increases the distance, and it distorts who you are. That doesn't mean you become cold or indifferent. It means you carry your pain with grace. It means you mourn with dignity. It means you say, yes, this hurts, but I won't become someone I can't live with just to keep someone who doesn't want to stay. You see, people confuse humility with self-erasure, but they are not the same. Being humble doesn't mean becoming spineless. It means recognizing your flaws without surrendering your core. When you beg, you're not just asking someone to come back, you're offering to reshape yourself entirely, just for the sake of proximity. And in that moment, you've not only lost the relationship, you've lost yourself. There's a principle embedded in ancient stories and mythologies, and even in modern psychology. The path forward requires sacrifice, but not sacrifice of your integrity. You let go of attachments, old beliefs, versions of yourself that no longer serve your future. That's the price of transformation. But begging isn't sacrifice. It's regression. It's turning away from your potential, your future, your sovereignty as a human being. You reduce yourself in the hopes that they'll see you as enough again. But that never works. People don't come back to desperation. They come back, if they do at all, to confidence, to composure, to someone who didn't lose themselves in the fire. I understand how hard that is. I'm not saying it's easy. When your heart is involved, your logic doesn't operate the way it normally does. You're not reasoning anymore, you're surviving. But you've got to catch yourself. You've got to see the bigger picture. Because even if she still cares, she's watching what kind of person you become when things fall apart. And if what she sees is a version of you that's groveling, that's pleading, that's dissolving into fragments, then even her care might start to fade. Not because she's cruel, but because the essence of who you were, the grounded, composed, admirable version of you, got lost in the aftermath. So instead of begging, stand up straight, literally and figuratively. Carry yourself with the posture of someone who knows they're not perfect, but who refuses to abandon themselves. Let your heartbreak refine you, not reduce you. Don't use her care as an excuse to stay small. Use it as a reminder that you were once loved and therefore are capable of being loved again, but not at the cost of your soul. Because in the end, if someone still cares and they're meant to be in your life, they'll return on their own terms, not because you begged, but because you grew. Hold your ground. It's a hard truth to accept, but one that you absolutely must confront if you're going to grow through the pain you're facing. Just because someone still cares about you doesn't mean they're coming back. Caring is not the same thing as commitment. And in moments of emotional turmoil, especially when you've been left behind, it's incredibly easy to blur those two lines. You start reading into things. You analyze every word, every look, every delayed reply, searching for signs that maybe she still feels something. And you might be right, she might. But that doesn't mean she's willing or even able to rebuild what was broken. Care is complex. People care for all sorts of reasons. Out of guilt, out of nostalgia, out of habit, out of shared history. And yes, out of genuine affection. But none of that obligates them to stay or return or fight for the relationship. Feelings don't automatically translate into action. That's where most people get stuck. They believe that if she still cares, then surely it's just a matter of time. Surely, if they say the right thing or wait patiently, she'll realize what she's lost and come back. But often she's already made peace with her decision. Her care is still there, but her direction is elsewhere. You need to understand something fundamental about people and relationships. We don't just commit to each other because of how we feel. We commit because of what we're willing to take responsibility for. Real commitment means saying, I see the flaws, I see the weight of this, and I'm still choosing to stay and carry it. Care without commitment is like a flicker of warmth in a cold room. It doesn't sustain you, it doesn't shelter you. And chasing that flicker, hoping it will turn back into a fire, will only leave you out in the cold longer. So you have to stop mistaking emotion for intent. She might cry when she sees you. She might look back. She might say she misses you, but that doesn't mean she's prepared to rebuild. It doesn't mean she's going to undo the distance that's already been put in place. And if you keep showing up, expecting that care to reverse the course of reality, you're going to prolong your suffering. You're going to trap yourself in a loop of false hope. And you deserve better than that. You deserve clarity even when it's painful. Sometimes people walk away not because they stopped caring, but because they've accepted that care isn't enough. And if they can accept that, you must too. You have to. Otherwise, you're trying to hold on to something that's already slipped through your fingers. And every time you reach for it again, you reopen the wound. You set yourself back. Because deep down, you know she had the chance to stay, and she didn't. That doesn't make her a villain, and it doesn't make you unworthy. It just means the story changed. And here's the thing. When you internalize this truth, it changes how you see yourself. You stop taking her decision as a reflection of your inadequacy. You start to see it as an outcome of two people on different paths with different capacities. She made a choice. It might have been a hard one, and it might have hurt her too, but she made it. And that's all the information you need to move forward with dignity. But you can't do that if you keep entertaining the fantasy that her care will somehow resurrect the relationship. That's not how healthy relationships are built. They aren't built on emotional residue. They're built on shared vision, mutual effort, daily choices. And if you're the only one still showing up, still trying, still waiting, then it's not a relationship anymore. It's a memory you're refusing to release. And I get it. Letting go is terrifying because once you stop hoping, the grief really begins. The silence gets louder. The reality settles in. But here's the paradox. That grief is what sets you free. That silence is what clears the noise. And that reality, that's your starting point. That's where you rebuild, not with fantasy, not with clinging, but with truth. You have to stop searching her words for hidden meaning. Stop checking if she's watching your stories. Stop wondering if the door is still open. If it is, you'll know. You won't have to decode mixed signals or plead for clarity. People who are ready to commit don't leave you guessing. And those who still care but choose not to act, you let them go. With respect, with grace, but you let them. Because you can't build your future with someone who isn't here. You can't grow while anchoring yourself to what used to be. And you can't love yourself fully while trying to prove your worth to someone who's already walked away. So if she still cares, let her. But don't make that your reason to wait. Let it be a sign that the connection was real, but the story ended. And that's okay. Walk forward. There's something deeply destructive that happens when a person starts to beg in the aftermath of a breakup. especially a man, but really anyone. And it's not just about what it looks like on the outside, it's about what it does to your inner structure, your identity. When you beg, you fracture your own integrity. You tear apart the part of you that knows how to stand still in chaos, how to remain centered in the face of loss. Because what you're saying in that moment is, I am nothing without you. I can't hold myself together unless you come back and choose me again. And whether you say those words out loud or not, the posture says it all. What's worse is that this kind of behavior doesn't just communicate need, it communicates surrender. Not the good kind of surrender that allows you to accept what is and grow from it, but the desperate kind. The kind that turns you into a version of yourself that's smaller, softer, in the worst way, crumbling. And you might think that showing that much vulnerability is a sign of love, a demonstration of how much she means to you, but what it really does is push her further away. Because no one is drawn to neediness, not real neediness, especially not in the wake of a relationship that already broke under pressure. When you start to beg, to plead, to lose your composure, you're not only discarding your self-respect, you're stepping out of your own masculine frame, your personal structure, your sense of sovereignty. And here's the truth. She might still care, but she's watching how you handle the aftermath. She's watching who you become now that things have fallen apart. If what she sees is a man collapsing, emotionally, psychologically, she can't come back to that. Even if there's affection left, even if there's pain in her too, because people don't come back to someone who's abandoned himself. Being strength in this moment doesn't mean being cold or pretending you're fine. It means facing the hurt directly without letting it define your actions. It means saying, yes, I'm heartbroken. Yes, I'm confused, but I still know who I am. You don't beg because you respect yourself more than the circumstances. You stand firm, not because it doesn't hurt, but because you know that losing someone else isn't worth losing yourself over. And I promise you, if you let your integrity go, if you betray yourself just to get a response from her, you'll regret it more than the breakup itself. Because you'll have to live with the version of you that you became for someone else. And that's a slow, aching loss. If things fall apart, you're given a rare and terrible opportunity to rebuild or to crumble. And most people don't realize that begging is a form of crumbling. It's an attempt to escape the grief, to grasp at the past, to force a reality that no longer fits. But rebuilding, that's something else. That means holding your posture even when your hands are shaking. It means walking away not because you stopped loving her, but because you refuse to keep chasing someone who doesn't want to be caught. And don't mistake this for pride. This isn't about ego. This is about order. It's about putting yourself back in alignment with something deeper. Your values, your boundaries, your path forward. Begging throws all of that out the window. It places you on your knees before someone who already chose to leave. And once you go down that road, it's incredibly difficult to regain their respect or your own. Because deep down, you'll know what you did. You'll know you sold your center for the chance at reconciliation. You have to be stronger than your impulses. In that moment of panic, when your mind is screaming at you to text her one more time, to show up, to pour your heart out, you have to stop and ask yourself, what kind of man am I becoming right now? What kind of person? Because she may have left, but you're still here. And the future you, the one who has healed, who has grown, who has rebuilt, he's watching how you carry yourself through this storm. Don't let him down. There's something strangely dignified about silence in the face of loss. Something powerful in not responding to every urge for closure or reassurance. That silence speaks louder than any words you could send her. It says, I hurt, but I still belong to myself. And that's the version of you worth becoming. Not the one who bends, who breaks, who begs, but the one who stands, even when he's bleeding. So even if she still cares, even if she reaches out, even if you catch a glimpse of what you used to have, don't beg. Don't hand over your strength in exchange for temporary relief. Because once you start down that road, it's not her you lose, it's you. Keep your posture. There's a certain moment after loss, especially romantic loss, where you're faced with a decision far more important than it might seem on the surface. It's the moment where you either let go and grow, or you hold on and stay the same, slowly deteriorating under the weight of something that's no longer real. And when you're in pain, when the memories are fresh and raw, it's almost always easier to hold on. Not because it's good for you, but because it's familiar, the past is comfortable, even when it hurts, because it's known. The future, on the other hand, is full of uncertainty, and that terrifies people. But growth doesn't happen in comfort. Growth happens in loss. It happens in the collapse. It happens when what you thought you could count on disappears and you're left staring at the rubble, wondering what to do with it. That's the moment. That's the test. And begging, clinging only delays that process. It stops the wheel from turning. You end up standing still, paralyzed by what you wish could be instead of stepping into what needs to be. If you beg, you postpone your own transformation. You avoid the pain by trying to resurrect something that already completed its purpose. You tell yourself that if you can just get her back, things will go back to normal. But what you really mean is that you want to escape the discomfort of change. And that's not strength. That's avoidance. That's denial disguised as devotion. Letting go is brutal. It's violent in its own quiet way. You don't just lose the person. You lose the version of yourself that existed with them. The routines, the conversations, the future you had mentally constructed. It all collapses. And people underestimate the emotional impact of that kind of collapse. But it's not something to run from. It's something to walk through. Deliberately, painfully, because that walk is where you meet the next version of yourself. But if you beg, if you plead, you stop walking, you sit down in the middle of the wreckage and call it home. You start to build your identity around the idea that the only way forward is backward. And that lie is corrosive. It eats away at your resilience. It keeps you small. It locks you into a narrative that says your best days are already behind you. And that's simply not true. Every person who's ever truly evolved, who's ever become more honest, more grounded, more capable, has done so through some form of loss, some form of letting go. And no, it doesn't happen overnight. You don't wake up the day after and feel enlightened. You feel wrecked. You feel hollow. But that's the soil of growth. That's the ground where new things start to take root. And you've got to give yourself the chance to stand there without grasping at what's fading. So there's something deeply human about wanting to fix what's broken, about wanting to fight for what once felt good. That impulse is noble to an extent. But there's a point where the fight becomes desperation, where you're not fighting for love anymore. You're fighting against reality. And the longer you do that, the more energy you waste. Energy that could be used to rebuild yourself. Energy that could be used to rediscover who you are without her. And that's the point. That's where you need to get to. Not because she wasn't important, not because the relationship meant nothing, but because the next chapter of your life depends on your willingness to step into it fully without dragging the past behind you like a dead weight. There's a discipline to letting go. It's not passive. It's not giving up. It's an active choice to face the pain rather than hide behind hope. It's the recognition that something once beautiful has now reached its end, and that your job is not to keep it alive artificially, but to honor what it was, and then move on. Not bitterly, not resentfully, but with clarity, with respect for yourself and for the time you shared. You can't become who you're meant to be while you're stuck chasing who you were with her. That version of you was tied to that season, that dynamic, that story. And if it's over, then so is that chapter. And it's not the end, it's just the end of that part. But the new part doesn't begin until you stop fighting the truth, until you stop begging, until you stop anchoring yourself to someone else's absence. You have to release her fully, not just in words, but in action, in thought, in energy. And that doesn't mean you don't care. It doesn't mean you weren't serious. It means you're choosing to evolve. It means you're choosing to become the kind of person who can stand alone, face pain, and come out the other side wiser, stronger, more whole. Because that's what this is about. Not just surviving the loss, but being changed by it in the right direction. Let go, not because she's not worth fighting for, but because you are. Walk forward without begging. One of the most crucial things you need to understand in the wake of heartbreak, especially as you're tempted to reach back out, to explain yourself, to pour your heart out just one more time, is that dignity is not just a posture. It's a protection. When you maintain your dignity even through the emotional wreckage, you're not being cold or indifferent. You're honoring yourself. You're refusing to become someone that even you won't recognize later on. And that refusal matters more than almost anything else in this process. It's tempting to believe that vulnerability alone is noble. That if you just open your chest wide enough and show her how deeply you're hurting, how much she means to you, she'll see it and change your mind. That maybe your emotional transparency will be enough to remind her of what you had. But the problem with that is this: vulnerability without boundaries becomes exposure. And exposure in the wrong context doesn't bring people closer, it makes them pull away. Because the moment you expose your whole self to someone who's already made the decision to step back, what you communicate without meaning to is that you've got nothing left, that you've placed your entire identity in their hands. And that's not attractive, it's not compelling, it doesn't invite respect. What it does often is affirm the very reasons they left in the first place. That's the brutal part of this. You think you're proving your love, but sometimes what you're really doing is proving your dependency. There is a form of strength that emerges when you hurt and still hold your frame. When you feel the sting of rejection, the ache of absence, and you still look in the mirror and say, I'm not going to collapse, I'm not going to plead, I'm not going to give someone else the power to reduce me to a shell of myself. That strength is rare, and it's hard-earned, but it's also unforgettable. It's the kind of strength that quietly commands respect, not just from others, but from yourself. You must remember that how you carry yourself in these moments is shaping your identity, even if you don't realize it yet. The person you're becoming is being forged in the fire of this pain. And the way you respond, whether you chase or whether you compose yourself, is laying the foundation for how you'll handle every future setback. Because this isn't just about her, this is about you. This is about building something inside yourself that won't break every time someone else changes their mind. So when you feel the urge to send that message, to plead for another chance, to rehash the past, pause, breathe, ask yourself, what am I trying to prove here? Am I fighting for love, or am I just afraid of being alone? There's a difference. Love is not begging. Love doesn't require you to humiliate yourself. Real love includes mutual choice, mutual effort, mutual vision. And if that's not there, then you're not fighting for love anymore. You're fighting against the reality of someone else's choice. You can care deeply and still choose distance. You can still love someone and walk away with your head held high. That's not coldness, that's maturity. That's wisdom. That's the part of you that says, I know my value, I know my worth, and I won't trade that away just to temporarily soothe this ache. Because that ache will pass, but the shame of betraying yourself lingers much longer. The embarrassment of pleading, of giving someone your soul in exchange for attention or pity, that's something that doesn't fade quickly. And you'll look back on this time one day and you'll ask yourself, did I make myself smaller? Did I try to become more palatable just to be wanted again? Or did I stand in the truth of who I am even when it hurt? That answer matters. Because dignity isn't something you can borrow. You either live in it or you don't. There's something incredibly powerful about a person who feels everything, who goes through the full storm of emotion and still doesn't chase, who still chooses stillness, who still chooses respect, not out of spite, not to prove a point, but because they understand that some things aren't worth losing your self-respect over. Because once that's gone, once you've traded your dignity away, it's incredibly hard to recover. Not impossible, but hard. And in the end, was it really worth it? Did the begging bring her back in the way you hoped, or did it only deepen the wound? Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is nothing, no response, no last words, just silence. Not as a tactic, not as manipulation, but as truth. Because your silence says, I won't degrade myself for closure. I won't twist myself into something I'm not just to be seen again. I'll grieve, but I'll do it standing. And when you do that, when you choose dignity over desperation, you begin to heal in a real way, not not just superficially, not just enough to get by, but deeply, from the inside out. You begin to return to yourself. So when the moment comes, when the urge hits, and your chest is tight, and your thoughts are racing, remember this: dignity first, always, no matter how much it hurts. Because how you carry yourself in your lowest moments defines who you are far more than anything you ever say. Let's talk about value. Not the kind of value that other people place on you, but the kind you place on yourself. That's where everything begins and ends. When a relationship breaks down, and especially when it ends with ambiguity or lingering care, the greatest danger isn't just heartbreak. It's that you begin to question your worth. You start to wonder if you were enough. You start to believe that maybe if you had done something differently, been someone slightly better, maybe then she would have stayed. And those thoughts, left unchecked, don't just hurt, they erode you from the inside out. That's why so many people end up begging, not because they don't know what happened, but because they've allowed the situation to distort how they see themselves. You begin to believe the loss is proof of your inadequacy. And once that seed is planted, your behavior starts to reflect that belief. You lower your standards. You silence your boundaries. You overcompensate. You chase. All of it driven by this gnawing fear that maybe you're just not enough on your own. That maybe, without her, you lack value. But that's a lie, a dangerous one, because it places the center of your self-worth in someone else's hands. And once you've done that, you've already lost. Not just the relationship, but something far more critical. You've lost yourself. And that's the one person you absolutely cannot afford to abandon. Your value isn't up for negotiation. It isn't decided by whether someone stays or leaves. It isn't based on how she feels today or tomorrow. It's inherent. It's foundational. And no relationship, no matter how intense or meaningful, has the right to define it for you. Because if you give away that power, you're at the mercy of everyone you meet. You're always waiting for someone to validate you, to confirm that you're worthy, lovable enough. That's no way to live. That's a cage. And look, we all want to be seen, to be chosen, to be loved deeply. But that desire becomes destructive when it overrides your own self-respect, when it makes you forget who you are. You don't beg because you know your value. You don't plead for affection because you understand what you bring to the table. And if someone decides they don't want to sit at that table anymore, you let them go, not because it doesn't hurt, but because you've got the courage to keep showing up for yourself, even when no one else does. And this is where discipline comes in, the discipline of self-respect. It's not loud or flashy. It doesn't always look heroic. Sometimes it's just choosing not to send that message, choosing to delete the draft, choosing to walk away instead of explaining yourself one more time to someone who already made their decision. That's hard. But that's strength. That's real strength. And that's what rebuilds your value from the inside out. And here's something else to consider. The way you handle loss is a message to the world about who you are. When you stay grounded, when you don't collapse, when you grieve without groveling, you're showing yourself and others that you have a spine, that you've got a center. And the people who truly matter in your life, they're drawn to that. Not because you're invulnerable, but because you're real. Because you feel deeply, but you don't betray yourself in the process. You'll meet people in life who see your value immediately. Others won't see it until you've walked away. And some will never see it at all. None of those outcomes change the truth of your worth. That's why you must hold the line, not just for the sake of dignity, but for the integrity of your soul. You can't build a meaningful life if every time someone leaves, you crumble. You've got to be the one person you can count on to stay, even through the storm. Now, if she still cares, but still walks away, that doesn't mean you weren't good enough. It doesn't mean your value diminished. It might mean she's dealing with her own battles. It might mean she doesn't have the capacity to hold what you offered. That's not something you control. What you do control is how you respond. Do you chase after her to prove you're enough? Or do you remember that your value was never up for debate in the first place, because that's the moment of truth? That's where transformation happens, when you stop outsourcing your identity to someone else's acceptance. When you stand still in the middle of rejection and say, I'm still here, I'm still whole, and I still matter. If you don't know your value, you'll spend your life begging people to tell you who you are. But once you do know, once you've felt it in your bones, you won't need to beg again. You'll walk forward with your eyes open.